In the previous video, we talked about how a GM can adjudicate an improvised action from a player, whether or not they know if a feat exists for it or not. In this video, we will talk about what happens when a player wants to do something that feels mechanically off limits to them, not just based off of the game's mechanics, but also based off of the game's narrative limitations. For example, would you just allow a fighter to cast Fireball if nothing gives them mechanical permission to cast Fireball? That one I assume most people would say no to, but would you allow a fighter to taunt if they didn't have the Guardian's taunt feature? Hey everyone, Utkarsh from Spirit Bell Games here. As discussed in the previous video, there are two types of feats that come up when talking about whether you need a feat to do something or not. One type of feat are enhancer feats. These take existing basic actions that you can already do and makes them faster or better or both. We've discussed this type of feat and how to adjudicate for it in great detail in the previous video. In this video, let's talk about trying to improvise actions based off of feats and features and spells that seem to unlock a whole new category of actions that you otherwise couldn't do before. And this part gets tricky. There are layers of subjectivity involved in deciding what actually counts as an unlocker and how far it is from being an enhancer. So we will be exploring this topic with my lens of subjectivity, though I fully expect that you will draw the lines quite differently on what you consider to be enhancers versus unlockers. Let us start off with a simple one, one that I think we all can agree on, which is the Survey Wildlife skill feat for the survival skill. This feat says, you can study details in the wilderness to determine the presence of nearby creatures. You can spend 10 minutes assessing the area around you to find out what creatures are nearby based on nests, scats, and marks on vegetation. And then it goes into how you do it mechanically. This feat seems to suggest that without this feat, you can't do this. You can't assess an area for wildlife or do a natural survey, which is ludicrous to me. Even though there doesn't exist a basic exploration activity on doing the survey of the wildlife specifically, personally, I think that yes, you actually can do what the feat details, but with a longer period of time. So if you spend 1 hour doing, let's call it a type of investigation, really, then you can do everything that the feat says you can, but taking 6 times as long, a full hour instead of just 10 minutes. And taking the feat should be, in my mind, a reduction of time frame. So this, I think, is an example of where an unlocker is unlocking something that should already exist. That for some of you, you may think that it does already exist, that it is in fact an investigation piece, and this is just a subset of investigate, which I would agree with. So this, I think, is an easy version of how to deal with an unlocker. Now let's go to a more interesting version. The Guardian gets a special feature called Taunt. By taunting an enemy, they draw the enemy's ire towards them, making the enemy less competent at striking the Guardian's allies. And if they do try and attack the Guardian's allies, that enemy becomes off guard until the start of their next turn. This is an unlocker feature, right? This is not just hunt prey, which is an enhancer for trying to track your prey, which you could already do. This feels to me like something that is unlocking a whole new category of actions that try to draw the ire of the enemy towards you. Now, it can be argued, and I have argued this in the past, that technically you can do this by grappling an enemy, that an enemy who's grappled is much more incentivized to strike you than strike one of your allies. But doing this from a range with words, that feels like a whole new category, and that's why I'm treating this as an unlocker feature. So what would I do if one of my bard players wanted to taunt an enemy? Well, personally, I would make it a basic skill action for the performance skill. If you haven't seen my video where I discuss each of the skills and the power level associated with it, there's a point when I hit performance and I start to question why this skill even exists. But I think performance can do something that Bon Mot itself does not. Bon Mot as a feat is an action that reduces the enemy's will to fight but it doesn't necessarily draw their attacks towards you. Whereas a skill action where you taunt the enemy from range using language, so with the linguistic trait, could function as a basic skill action for performance that may be further enhanced by feat. And I think this is another version of an unlocker feature that should be available in a worse mechanical capacity to everyone as basic actions. Okay, now let's go to an even harder example. What about the Conceal Spell feat? This is a spell shape which makes your next spell that you cast this turn subtle, so it hides the casting effects, but it does not hide the spell's physical effects itself. Should a player be able to improvise this without having the Concealed Spell feat? And this is where I start getting to the point where I'm uncertain. With Survey Wildlife and with Taunt, I was fairly certain that yes, you should be able to. With Conceal Spell, I can see a good argument being made for either side. On the one side, perhaps a stealth check, similar to Hide, would be appropriate. Perhaps there would be some requirement of environmental permissions, such as the caster hiding behind a wall or in a particularly noisy environment for the GM to allow this. But I can also see that because we are in the realm of magic, that this spell shape may be limited only to people who take that feat. So personally, for Conceal Spell, I would require both narrative permission, so something in the environment that allows you to cast things in a little less obvious manner, and a stealth check to gain some of the effects of not being noticed in your spellcasting. In combination, those two things, they don't fully make your spell subtle in the same way that the subtle trait implies, but it does make it so others don't notice you casting your spell. So that was already a challenging one. Let's try and get to even more challenging unlockers. For example, the Guardian's Intercept Attack. The Guardian uses this reaction to step towards an ally getting hit and take the hit for them. What if a player character that was already adjacent to their ally wanted to interpose and take some of the hit on behalf of that ally? Would you allow this? Would I allow this? I am not certain that I would, but as the game is being played and the stakes are rising, I'm also not sure that I wouldn't. If pushed to come up with an improvisation right now, I would say that perhaps it could work like the aid action, where you have to spend an action to prepare to defend an ally and then use your reaction to try and interpose yourself. You use their AC and you can only take half the damage. Does that make sense? I would have to think about this some more. And even then, I might come to the conclusion that no, I don't want to allow this. What about creative uses of predefined spells? If someone says, I want to use a fireball and just pump it into the ground to create hazardous terrain, which is all heated up like lava, would I allow it? That one, I'm fairly certain that I would not. And if I'm thinking about magic as being freeform, then there's no strong reason to not allow it. Instead, I would have to lean on the explanation that Paizo gives in their Strength of Thousands AP when they describe magic as being part of this wheels and ruts analogy, where the spells come in such predefined templates because those are the channels that have been used by various magicians all throughout time. And so they have created these ruts, these easy passages through which magic can come through into this world in that predefined template. Narratively, with this explanation, I wouldn't feel too bad about preventing someone from using freeform magic. But in the back of my mind, I know that if I were playing, for example, Fate RPG, this would be much more allowed. And I believe Mage the Ascension also works in a similar freeform manner. So after all of this discussion about how you can avoid saying you need a feat for that or you need a feature for that, I have come to my limits to the point where ultimately I would say no, you would need a spell for that. I'm curious as to where you land. Do you see that this improvisation should be allowed all the way to its intended extremes, into freeform magics and creative uses of spells outside of what the template of that spell says? Or did you end up drawing the line much earlier to before Taunt and Intercept Attack? Let me know down in the comments, because this is something that I'm very curious about. Even though Pathfinder 2nd Edition is perceived as this highly codified system, I see a lot of potential in it for improvised play, but I also see the limitations of it in terms of how I would run it and when I would lean on just those codifications. But this has been my general thesis on how you can run and adjudicate improvised actions, whether a feat exists for it or not. And when I would say, no, you need a feat or feature or spell for that. I haven't given you any hard rules on when you should say, no, you need a feature for that, or you need a spell for that. And that is on purpose because I think this is a very subjective thing and comes down to how you run your worlds. For now, this is me signing off, wishing you all engaging games.